Welcome to Build. I'm Ricky Camilleri. You probably know my next guest from his hilarious performances in films like Scream and Ready to Rumble, but David Arquette is here to talk about a different project. Survivor's Guide to Prison is an attempt to help audiences not just understand the mass incarceration complex, but how they should handle that complex when faced with it personally. Arquette serves as a producer for the film, and it's directed by Matthew Cooke. Let's take a look at a clip.
Be prepared to be completely humiliated and violated.
The worst nightmare of my whole life. I don't know, it's so scary.
He didn't do anything.
Oh, that's messed up, but it could never happen to me. Yes, it could. It could happen to you, just like that.
What we see on most TV shows is not reality.
I was so frightened.
Are you gonna be a victim? No, I ain't gonna be a victim. That means I gotta be the victimizer.
I wasn't in San Quentin a week, and I watched a man die right next to me.
I'm on my bunk, and I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, damn, ain't somebody gonna come help this dude?
It's more like a horror show.
Just ask for an attorney.
Don't blindly trust authority figures.
Be ready to stand your ground. You're gonna need money.
Pray for a miracle.
They take a bad situation and they usually make it much worse.
And you turned me into a murderer because I had to.
I'm sorry.
All the data, luckily, is out there. It's just a matter of whether you give it.
We're going to get perspectives from investigative journalists, analysts, academics, prison staff, lawyers, cops, inmates.
So in the unfortunate case that this may happen to you, this is the Survivor's Guide to Prison.
We've been targeted, now here's what the problem. Are they controlling you? They got a hold on you? You need a man in a suit to tell you what to do? I'll grab the podium mic and open the night. We don't read between the lines, let alone the stripes and the stars. Presidents get popped in their cars. I ain't copping a drop. Real talk.
Everybody, please welcome David Arquette. Let's hear it.
Thanks.
Hey, man, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about how this happened. Why did you want to produce this film? What were you reading? What were you thinking about? How did this come to you?
Well, I'm dear friends with Matthew Cooke. He's an amazing filmmaker, Oscar nominated for his work on Deliver Us from Evil. And we've been friends forever. And we were having a debate about capital punishment. I was for it. He was against it. I was like, yeah, if someone murders someone, they should be killed. And then we started talking about it, looking into it, and he started explaining his point of view, and then, let me see an early cut of this. And that was 2 years ago. He'd been working on it for 5 years. It took 5 years for this to come out. So it really changed my perspective. I mean, the type of information that's in here, and just the rapid fire, like it kind of grips you. It just doesn't let go. It really shows you, because it's a crisis going on right now in our country. And, this is America, the land of the free, but more people are locked up here than anywhere else in the world. The Innocence Project estimates that there's 100,000 people at least, in jail for crimes they didn't commit. And a lot of the time, people plead to deals that, to get a lesser sentence, even if they haven't committed the crime, just to, make the sort of nightmare end.
They have no leg to stand on when they go to trial. They don't have the money for a lawyer. They don't have the money for a good lawyer. So if they go to trial, they could be getting life in prison rather than 20 years or something like that.
So we don't really have a court system. Yeah. Most cases are settled with a plea deal. Well, so a lot of things happen. Like if you can't afford bail, you could sit in prison for a year, 2 years, 3 years before they get to your case. So that's like, it's just...
Leif Browder in the Bronx, the famous case.
We show a story in this. It's so sad. So sad. This kid got wrongly accused of stealing a backpack. He had nothing to do with it. They put him in jail, held him there for 3 years, no explanation, and then finally just released him. And he was so tormented by his experience. You saw him in there, in that clip, when it says this is a horror movie. That's him in jail, being beat up by, correctional officers and other inmates. It was just a tragedy. And he was so tormented by that experience that he took his own life.
Oftentimes we have juveniles that are in adult facilities as well because we can't fit them in juvenile facilities. We're using solitary as a form of punishment as well on children and juveniles. We're breeding people to be mentally ill, and then we have no mental illness facilities to help these people afterwards, so we toss them in and out of jail.
exactly.
It's a horrible cycle that we've developed.
Yeah, totally.
What I loved about the film is that I think so often when we talk about the mass incarceration complex, someone wants to say, well, it's because there are private prisons, or it's because it's this, or it's because it's that. And it's like, no, it's an entire system that has kind of atrophied us in many different ways. And so therefore we are kind of like, there are many different reasons that this is happening. And I think the film kind of explores all of those reasons.
Yeah.
Was it hard as a producer to sort of narrow it down as you were building it with Matthew?
Well, Matthew has a really good just take on storytelling and what's important, and you know. But yeah, it's a hard film to watch. It's a hard reality that we're facing. So the whole process has been enlightening. I mean, we've been meeting people just through this whole process that have been incredible. A lady named Donna Hilton, who wrote a book, who was incarcerated for 27 years. Reggie Cole is someone we tell his story in this, and Bruce Lisker. They're both wrongly accused, went away for decades, and you know, they share their story, and it's really compelling to hear from people and what they experience, and that it could happen to you. That's the scary thing.
When did that angle on the topic come into it? Because I think a lot of people want to tell the story of mass incarceration right now, but when did it's a very fresh take on it to say, this is how you survive it, because we all might have to go through this process at some point. If it
Even
keeps
the
going
president and his administration might have to watch survivors go.
Hopefully they go
sorry,
through it.
Sorry.
Hopefully they have to go through it.
Let's not get political.
Oh no, let's get political.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, some people might be going to jail. But it's just certain things. Like, you know, you have the right to a lawyer. I mean, the kind of lawyer you're going to get if you can't afford one is a whole different situation. But there's not a lot of accountability for prosecuting attorneys, just their misconduct. There's, you know, some officers. Now, we're not trying to, you know, beat, like, down the system and say, like, you guys are wrong. We know there's hero cops out there, and they're doing, like, one of the toughest jobs in the world, and we respect them and thank them for their service. But there are some bad people, you know, out there on both sides of everything. So we need accountability. We need, you know, just different things along the way that we can sort of check on what's going on, make sure it's not, you know, 1 out of 10 people get raped in prison, you know, sexually assaulted. That's not okay. It's not okay outside. It's not okay inside, you know? So people make jokes about it, like, ooh, you're going to go to prison, and then they'll make a joke about it. But the reality is it's rape. And, you know, if we're going to be a society that is, you know, morally corrupt, then we're going to have, you know, more corruption all over. So, like, we start clearing this stuff up. And I like it. Like, what's going on now? People are starting to talk about stuff and bring things into the light. You know, and it's just, then not to mention, people of color are disproportionately, you know, put in prison than any other, you know, people. So it's like, you know, so 30%, you know, the people of color in our population, but there's 60% in prison. So it just shows you that it's disproportionate. It's skewed against, you know, people living in poverty or whatever.
Extreme poverty is being met with extreme incarceration at this point. That's how we're dealing with poverty, by locking people up, and how we're dealing with mental illness.
Absolutely.
As well.
And they're seeing a lot of things that are helping. You know, meditation. It sounds crazy, but Shakespeare in jail, that we show it there, and it gives people, like, you know, self-worth. It explains sort of the dynamic of these relationships that Shakespeare writes about, and they learn about themselves and talk about it. And the
meditation, education, expression, recidivism,
Yes, I can never get that word right. It's so hard. Recidivism rate is people going back after they've already been in prison drops tremendously. In the higher education that they get in prison, if they can get a master's degree, the recidivism rate is 0. Yeah. So it's like, so the more we educate people, the more they have sort of goals. And you know, there's a place called Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles that's doing great work, where they provide people with support groups and jobs, and value, human decency. There's some incredible people in this film. They talk about sort of our take on it, just where we label people criminals or murderers. And one of the women in the film explains it in a great way. She's like, there's seldom, it's small percentage of like psychopaths that are out there. Most people who commit murder are immediately remorseful, know they made a terrible mistake. Oftentimes it's in a situation where, there's either some kind of abuse taking place or they're just,
it's a crime of passion.
Yeah, or drugs or whatever it is. So it's all about addressing these underlying issues so that people, when they get out of prison and they've done their time, that they don't go back. Yeah. And that when they do go there, we don't treat them like animals or numbers. Obviously, people have to pay for their crimes. And, no matter how you slice it, it's not going to be fun going to prison. Not having the freedoms that anybody has. But it doesn't have to be this sort of medieval torture chamber.
It goes back to what you said at the beginning of this and how your conversation with Matthew Cooke started, where you believed in capital punishment and the idea of if you're a criminal, you are treated like a criminal and you should, pay for what you've done in some sort of eye for an eye way. And and in that regard, we're just breeding more criminals.
Yeah.
So the idea of like, if you are a criminal, oftentimes when you tell people about prison reform, they say, well, they're criminals. Why do we need to treat them better than a lot of people in the street? It's like, that's not the question. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure that when they get out, they're better people than when they went in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The female prison population is just skyrocketing now. Or years ago it was, 10 to 18,000 people. It's over 200,000. And 80% of the women in prison are mothers. And we're working with Van Jones' organization, Cut 50, who want to reduce the prison population by 50%. And we did a dignity shirt where you could find on omaze.com. It says dignity, and it's to bring basic human rights to women in prison. So that, in some states, in the worst cases, if they're giving birth, they're still shackled. Yeah. It's insane. Often they're victims of sexual abuse, but they'll still be strip searched by men or watched in showers by men. And there's no consideration about distance to their children, like when they're put them across the country so they just never see their children again. Even if it's, we explore one story in the film of a mother that enrolled her son in her father's school district because he was in a better school district. And they found out about it, and they locked up both the mother and that mother's father. And they went away, and the father ended up dying in prison before he could get out and, go through trial. So it's just out of control what's going on out there. And it's up to people to stand up, people with hearts to sort of recognize it and not just sort of buy into this whole thing we've been fed. There was a big push to do criminal justice reform because they've recognized that the punishment model doesn't work. It doesn't work in us raising our children, and it doesn't work in our prison system. So they were making a big push toward it. And then, the equal rights in the 60s came up and all this stuff, and it just changed. It went back even worse, and now it's just a prison industrial complex that's, has a lot to do with money. We explore a lot of that on the film as well.
One of the things that you talk about in the film is that cameras are for the most part, not allowed into prisons. But it's strange because we have these kind of propagandistic TV shows on networks like MSNBC called Lock Up or Lockdown or, whatever. And you watch those and, thinking back, those are all about how vicious and psychopathic the criminals inside are and nothing about the prisons. Were you guys thinking about those shows at all when you were making this and making a kind of answer to that?
Yeah, we talk about it a lot. I mean, we show some stuff about that. We also wanted to show some of the positive stuff that's going on. I mean, we did this panel last night, and there's something called Hudson Link. That's a local organization that's bringing education into prisons, and they're expanding, and it's stuff like that that we need. I mean, it's hard, you know, everyone's got social media, so I've been promoting the film, and people are like attacking me saying like, how dare you, like, you know, education for prisoners, you know.
When you care more about criminals than my family. Blah,
yeah,
blah, blah.
but I get it. I get that people are angry and upset, but it is part of this mentality that we've all been sort of fed. So we're just trying to like open up the conversation. We like to say that it's a movement, not a movie. So, you know, we have a Facebook page, Survivor's Guide to Prison. People can go and then find different links. The only way we're really going to change this is through legislation. So there's Cut 50, and there's another amazing group called AARTI by Scott Butnick's organization, and that's the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And if you go there to AARTI.org, you can find out what legislation's coming up in each state, and you can vote on it accordingly.
So you just got involved in this by this one conversation with Matthew, and you became this dedicated to it?
Pretty much. I mean...
Your sister is also quite dedicated to it as well. She's in the film a little bit, and
she's great.
I follow her on Twitter as well.
Well, a few years ago, I did went to San Quentin and I taught acting class for with Sundance Channel, and it was a really eye-opening experience and meeting the people in there and seeing like how they were part of the show we were doing. They were doing films in San Quentin, expressing themselves. I was doing sort of an acting portion. I got to talk to a lot of these guys. And one sort of thread throughout it was abuse. I mean, people grew up. One of these guys told me that he came home, he was 10 years old, he came home with a puppy he had just found. He was so like in love with this puppy. And then his like crazy abusive stepfather took the puppy, slammed it against the wall, and killed it. And he said at that moment, he just thought, this world is evil. I'm not safe. I'm going to be the craziest person I can. So it's often like abuse that leads to more abuse, and if you don't
put them in a house of horrors that features only abuse to punish them for it. Yeah,
exactly. Like we want when people come out for them to be, you know, productive members of society and feel self-worth and learn from their. You know, Danny Trejo is one of the producers on it. We brought him on it. He was the last producer and the last piece of the puzzle to come together, because years and years ago he'd gone to prison, and but he still you know, like me, I know people that are in prison, and Busta Rhymes has a friend that's doing you know, caught up in the 3 strikes thing, and they're passionate about it. Danny's an amazing example of somebody who turned his life around completely, you know, is this incredible spirit. He's great. He's such a nice guy. And some friends of mine, I grew up as a graffiti writer. I've got a friend who's now a fine artist who you would have thought could never, you know, come in. Now he's one of my like most upstanding friends. He's, you know, just...
What made you teach at San Quentin? How did that happen?
Just through this show with Sundance, they called me up, and I was like, that would be amazing. And then you go in and you see like what's going on, and you walk into the cells, and there's one of the things that stuck out in my mind is there was a lifer there who was sort of in charge of this block that he was showing me around in, and they let me go into his cell, and on the wall he just had like a painting, but it had just all these clocks. Like time, like I was like, whoa, and then it had a clock like ticking away. I was like, how could you like just have that as your thing? And he's like,
trying to forget time. What do you mean? How are you obsessed with time while you're doing life here?
Yeah, it was so poignant. But you know, he was another example of just a great person who had made a terrible decision and is paying for it for the rest of his life, but. You know, inside, I mean, there's a lot of like support groups, a lot of like, you know, I know AA goes in there and helps people and for addiction and all that.
Let's get some questions from our audience. Who has a question? Right here.
Hi, I'm a big fan of yours.
Thanks.
I wanted to know, what did you gain most from working on this project?
Well, what I gained most was just an understanding of what was going on, which I never knew anything about. One of the things we show in there is that there's essentially this trade system going on that's completely corrupt. So there's all this work being done by prisoners. Like they put together most of the uniforms for the military and all this, but their hourly wage is like 35 cents or something. It's completely like not.
New Jim Crow.
Yeah, and then so that makes deals like the bond system. It's a over $2 billion industry profit a year. So, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of really great groups. We heard about the Robert Kennedy Foundation working with Google, and they're doing things where they're providing bail for people that they, you know, believe are innocent or you know, just so they won't have to sit in prison. The chances of, if you go to county jail and you're in a prison uniform and you can't afford bail, that's how you're going to go to court. And the chances of you getting convicted of your crime are 3 times more just because you're wearing a jumpsuit. You just look like a criminal. It's not, you know, but if you get bail and you get out and you can put on a suit and you can get a lawyer, you have so much better of a chance of sort of fighting it.
Next question.
Hi. Did you ever research anything about military prisons based compared to like civilian prisons?
I haven't personally. I think Matthew has, and I know he's interested in sort of taking it to another level and showing different sides of it. But no, I don't. I haven't. Thanks.
I think we have time for one more. Oh, you right there.
Next to me. Hi. So I've actually visited a prison once before, and it was absolutely nothing like what I expected it to be. So I'm curious as to, between doing this project and your visit at San Quentin, what's something about the prison system in general that you think might be exaggerated or be completely different from what we're kind of told it is?
Well, exaggerated, I think just the labeling everyone as just a criminal. Like you're in there and you're just bad. Now you're no longer human, you're a number. So that to me is like something that just even opening it up for discussion that helps just to sort of do that. I mean, one of the things that is real, I mean, like they say in the film, if you're not a racist before you go in, you're going to be after. So they've set it up so this whole, you know, segregation in there. You know, there's the white phone, the black phone, the Mexican phone. You know, there's a whole, you know, different areas within the jail or prison that different groups sit in. You know, I don't know what I'd do if I went to prison. I mean, I wouldn't want to hang with the white supremacists. I'd be like, I don't know what I'd do. I don't know what I'd do. But luckily, if you see this film, we literally break down certain things that you make sure that you do. You know, ask for a lawyer as soon as any kind of trouble happens. You know, don't talk to anyone. When in prison, in jail, like anyone. Be respectful. Don't run your mouth. Like all kinds of stuff, and we break it down. So in the unfortunate event, if anything ever happened to anyone, that you have some tools on what to do.
David, it's incredibly important work. I'm glad that you're doing it, that you're putting this film out there. How can people see it?
It's available tomorrow on iTunes, Amazon, digitally. And you can see it there. It's also in New York and Los Angeles at Landmark Theaters.
David, thanks so much for being here, everybody. David Arquette.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.